Hello, my name is Becky Hill. I am in the Seneca County Genealogical Society. I'm also on the Tiffin 200 Bicentennial Committee, former librarian at the Hayes Presidential Library, and I will be giving this talk on February 1st for the Society, but I'm pre-recording it for use on websites. So I'm going to talk tonight, or this afternoon, or this morning, or whenever we are, on the early settlers of Tiffin, Ohio, and where did they come from? How did they get here? Why did they come? So we could see a little history of our area of Tiffin and Seneca County. This is a map of what Ohio looked like as they were dividing it up. You can see that there were some parts of Ohio that were settled way before other parts. Down in the south, it was 1786, 1798. There was a lot of early settlement down here. The state itself was actually admitted to statehood in 1803, but our area up here in Northwest Ohio was one of the last ones to be open for settlement, and it was sold by Congress to settlers starting in the 1820s. So we actually were the very last part of major part of Ohio that was settled, what was open for settlement. And Seneca County itself was open for land sales in 1820, and then Josiah Hedges opened, okay, what time is it? Hold on a second. And then Josiah Hedges had the town platted in 1822, and therefore the bicentennial is in 2022. Why did they come? They're better. People were always looking for land. It was people from the different parts of the country were always looking for cheaper, better land. And when this land opened for sale by the US government in the 1820s, they said, this is good land, we want to come here, it's cheap. They could buy land, 80 acres for $100 directly from the government. Good deal. It was not worn out by overplanting of crops, so it was fresh land and it was good for farming. Some settlers lived off the land and they just hunted, and this was good hunting here. It hadn't been over hunted. They would tend to use up the game and then move farther west if they weren't farmers and they were trappers and other things. So this was another place to get that for them to go. Some soldiers and militias saw the undeveloped land when they were here during the War of 1812. They went through this area of Ohio on their way to different battles, and they saw the land, remembered it, and when it was open for settlement, then they were some of the first that came back and bought land. Once people got here, they wrote back home and said, oh, this is a great place to come. Bring the family, bring the kids, bring the cousins, bring the people in the church. You know, there was a lot of word of mouth. So a lot of people would come here after they had friends or family had been here first. So where did they come from? We will start with the first wave of pioneers who came to Tiffin area from the 1820s to 30s. And I did this hand map and hand-drawn map. The map itself is quite nice, but I colored counties and things on my computer. So it's kind of a little hodgepodgey here. But what I did was I read through some of the counties where people came from, and I started coloring in the counties that they said they came from. Sometimes they would just say from Pennsylvania or Maryland or New York, but the ones that put counties in, I did a sampling, I should say, of those counties. And you can see here, it kind of is a good sampling, I would say, of what they were from, where they were from. Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York, New England, and other parts of Ohio. And then I did this very artistic drawings from what the what the county was to the name of the county. And really, you don't really care too much about these, but Frederick County, Maryland is a big one. And this is Frederick County, Maryland right here. And that's a lot of settlers came from there. A lot of settlers came from southeastern Pennsylvania and central southern Pennsylvania and western Pennsylvania. And then also all that area of Ohio that had already been settled, people were leaving that area and coming up to Seneca County when it opened up. So this is what the map looks like. So in the 1820s and 1830s, the migration to Seneca County came from southeast, southwest Pennsylvania, western Maryland, and some Virginians, New York and New England, and southern and eastern Ohio. I found this chart that listed all the people in Ohio counties and where they were born. And this one was the number of Maryland-born people in Ohio counties in the 1850 census. And Seneca County had 1,284 people, which was the fourth highest in the state of Maryland-born settlers, people in the county in 1850. The other counties that had higher numbers were all in the south of Ohio. So Maryland, big immigration point. How did they come? It would depend on the time period. It would depend on where they came from originally. Some of the major routes to the west, which is what Ohio was considered at the time. The routes in blue are the water routes. And whenever the settlers could take a water route, it would be less rigorous. It would be easier, could be cheaper. It's definitely easier. So when possible, they would ride on a river, ride on a raft, ride on a canal, go on a ship, and get to their destination if possible. Well, it wasn't possible to get to Seneca County from the south too much, except from the rivers a little bit. But from the north, they could come down through Sandusky area and come to Seneca County. So the water route, main route, would have been there, and we'll talk about that a little later. And then they could have gotten on the Allegheny and Pennsylvania, Monongahela, all those rivers near Pittsburgh, and floated down the Ohio, but then they'd still have to come up through Ohio by wagon or something. So these are the main routes. The yellow is before the Erie Canal, and that was a Mohawk Trail. And the green trail is Zane's Trace, and the yellow one is, the Mohawk one. The red is the Cumberland Trail. So that's there. With this topographic map, can you see the problems that they encountered to get to Seneca County? So it's fine if you just see the lines, but when you see what they had to go through with all those mountains on the way, you can see how hard it would have been. So it also explains why these routes were that way. So like from New York City, they could go to Albany via the Hudson River, and then they could go the Mohawk River Valley, basically over to Buffalo area, and then on the lakes. And the bulk of the people that came from here, they had fine over here, but then they had to get over the mountains to get to Pittsburgh, and then more hills to get to Seneca County. So there was a lot of hard hauling over hills and mountains to get to our area. The pioneers from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia would probably have taken the National or Cumberland Road. And this is a nice old map I found online, and it's called the Old National Road, and shows you starting here in Baltimore, going through Frederick County, Maryland, which is where they came from so often, through Hagerstown, Cumberland, all the way to Wheeling and Zanesville, and then farther west to, there's Mansfield up there. So we're, that's kind of out of proportion, but we're up there. So they obviously, the National Road didn't go through Seneca County, but it did get you into Ohio. And this is another thing I found on the internet on Cumberland Road, and the kind of wagons that they were using. And sometimes there were wagon trains, sometimes they're just individual people with their wagons. But most of the time they had their goods and all their furniture and things on the wagons, and everybody else was walking. There was hardly anybody in the wagons riding. So when they took the water route, for those in the mid-Atlantic area, one way was to work their way to using Forbes Road or Braddock's Road to Pittsburgh. So they had to go overland to Pittsburgh, and then they would either buy a flatboat or build a flatboat and travel down the Ohio River. And this route brought many individuals into the settlements of the southeast of Ohio. And again, they could have stopped down here and then traveled by horse and wagon up north. Once they were in Ohio, there were main trails and roads they took to Seneca County. There was the Scioto Harrison Trail is the main one, and that's basically Route 23 and Route 53. So you've got this road that was once an Indian trail, and then it was a military trail, and then they used it for wagons, and they finally turned it into actual roads. But it started from Ohio River and came up the Scioto River, and there was plenty of portages along the way, and it linked into near the Sandusky River and worked its way up there. And then it was all roads and not the rivers. So this is where the General Harrison used it as a military trail to get up to Detroit and other areas during the War of 1812. And the Fort Ball was here in Tiffin, and Fort Seneca was in Fort Seneca, and Old Fort was in Old Fort. And Fort Stevenson was in Seneca County or Sandusky County. So those were all along that Harrison Trail. That's the main one going north and south. This trail is the Great Trail, and this is the Lakeshore Trail. Zane's Trace it was named for Ebenezer Zane, who was considered to be the founder of Wheeling in what would eventually become West Virginia. This road was originally an Indian trail, as are so many of the early roads were. The federal government decided to renovate it so that it was travelable by wagons in 1796-7. In return for his work on the roads, Zane was given a land grant in Ohio. His land is known as Zanesville today. Ebenezer ferried folks from Wheeling on his ferry across the Ohio River, and then the folks would travel along his road into his town. Eventually, Zane's Trace would go from Wheeling through Ohio, then down to Kentucky. So our settlers that would come to our area could have picked up Zane's Trace around here, and then they would have branched off and gone farther on a northern route probably. The Great Trail, could have been the way they could have come, is coming from Pittsburgh. It started way back in Delaware and Chesapeake Bay, and came to the forks of the Ohio, and then passing through from Pittsburgh, this trail went through eastern Ohio to Sandusky Bay, and of course, not too far from Tiffin. But again, these were not super roads. These were Indian trails and pretty rough traveling. We already talked about this, and they built the forts, and they said that Sandusky River petered out in Crawford County, where travelers walked overland to the headwaters of Scioto River, and there they could put their canoes back in the water and travel on to the south. It was not an easy trip. Another one, this was from Facebook a week or so ago, and I just lifted it off because I had a nice view of our area, and this is the Scioto Trail, the Harrison Trail, and how it connects with Fremont and Tiffin and Upper Sandusky. And you could just see that's the same route, US 23, and then Upper Sandusky, 53 goes off, and 23 goes over towards Findlay. So, I mean, you can see these are the same, these Indian trails became regular roads, and then they became modern day roads. Now, if people were coming from New England or from New York State, they would not have gone that route. Before the Erie Canal, one way to get to Buffalo was to take the Mohawk Turnpike from Albany, which is here, to Utica, and then head west on the Great Genesee Trail Road until the person reached Buffalo. Another route was the Catskill Turnpike, and that was tougher, and that was down below the Finger Lakes, and it would connect the Hudson River to the Allegheny River. These were the two major routes across New York until 1825. And of course, to get to Albany, they could go up the Hudson River. So whenever possible, they would try to go by water, and then they would offload their materials and go by wagon or horseback or walk. For those in New York State, one way to get to Ohio was Seneca Road, which began in Buffalo and traveled along Lake Erie until it went into the Lake Shore Trail. This continued around Lake Erie and here on and end up in Detroit. So you're looking pretty much I-90 there. And of course, it went right up to Buffalo, I-80 and 90, and went east from there. Once the canal started, things changed a lot in that time period between 1825 to 1850. Canals were kind of invented at that time period, and it was completed. Erie Canal was completed to Buffalo in 1825, and that changed the travel to the west dramatically. People could come to New York City, or if they came from Eastern New York or from New England, they could ride across the state of New York on these canal boats. And that was way easier, and it wasn't that expensive, and it was hugely popular. If they were from directly from Germany, say, they could have gotten in at New York City and gone up the Hudson River and then taken the Erie Canal up to Buffalo, and then from Buffalo on west was all pretty much the Great Lakes. So new immigrants funneled through New York City because of that. And before that, New York City wasn't as huge a population as I think Boston and Philadelphia, maybe even Baltimore were bigger. But this really made New York City the center of immigration. I love this fact. On the Erie Canal, there were in 1836, which is a lot of people coming to Seneca County at that time, about 3,000 canal boats employed, leaving Albany almost every hour. So you could just see the lineup of canal boats. Every hour, something would take off and they would travel west. It's just like a bus system. It afforded facilities to immigrants to convey their families and property at a small expense. The price of passage by the packet boat, which was faster, included meals from Albany to Buffalo was $14.52. On a line boat, which is slower, it was only $5.44, but no meals. If you included meals, it was $9.07. So this is 1836. So if the settlers were coming, they could figure out they wanted to bring their own food or not bring their own food, and see what kind of money they had. And the people that were traveling faster on the packet boats were more like first class, and the line boats were second and third class, whatever.